Welcome to the Perspective Knoll, a home to original fantasy stories. Videos are uploaded once a week, feel free to like and subscribe. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 9 Unexpected Magic. Shawn had awoken from a dreamless sleep and was now lying on the stony floor of a darkened room. He sat up and his body ached from the uncomfortably hard ground. He looked around and there was nothing at all in the room, except an odd hole in the wall to his left, and to his right was what appeared to be another person, also lying on the floor and sleeping. Shawn stood up and realized there were stairs leading up to a hatch-style door into the ceiling. He slowly crept around the body and quietly made his way up to a creaking staircase and, once at the top, tried to open the hatch. As suspected, it didn't budge an inch, but then a strange feeling came over him. He was suddenly unable to move a muscle. Shawn was truly frozen in time. "Who are you?" asked the voice of a woman. It was not Jolene's sinister voice. Shawn tried to speak, but whatever had a hold of his body would not allow him to answer. Then his body slowly floated from the stairs and landed gently on the floor, but not before turning to face the only other person in the room. Standing before him was a beautiful young woman, blonde hair and wearing a white robe with purple accents. This robe was not a bathrobe, but more like something Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings would be wearing and considered to be a robe. There was a symbol on the chest of the robes, and it was that of a black sphere with rays of dark light falling upon two hands outstretched towards it. "Are you one of hers, left in here to torment me?" the woman asked. Shawn could feel the grip of whatever force that had him vanish, and he was able to move freely. "I'm not with her. I have no ties with her or anything to this place, really. I just got here. Well, I got here hours ago, or maybe a day." "Wait, what time of the day is it?" Shawn was sputtering, and it was because his brain was trying to wrap around everything, but it struggled to keep up. "A likely story. Surely this is what you are supposed to say to me in a very well-rehearsed reaction, so that I fall for your lies." The woman once again had put a spell on Shawn so that he was unable to move by a simple wave of her hands. "I have not been through training for years so that I could be defeated so easily by mind games." The woman walked over to the stairs and eyed the door above. She held up a hand and a violet swirling ball of energy appeared and began to grow. Moments later, it was the size of a basketball and she seemed to struggle slightly to maintain it in her outstretched hand. Small sparks of light like lightning flickered around the ball. Then she cocked her arm back and threw the energy ball up at the door. There was a burst of light, and then the power of the blast had come back down into the room and not at all through the ceiling. Shawn was thrown from his spot on the ground to the corner by the hole in the wall and struck with a numbing force. When he opened his eyes, he could see that the woman was still standing there and a faint white light surrounded her. "I expected nothing less," the woman said out loud as she turned and sat upon the lowest step of the stairs. Shawn sat back up and she no longer had the magical hold on him. "I don't know how I can reassure you that I am as much of a prisoner here as you. I guess I can start with this. My name is Shawn. I'm not from Lufforain at all. I have come through a painting with my friend Charles to try solving a murder that took place in my world. We know that whoever killed the man in my world came from this one. We met some wood elves somewhere in the Brunil forest, which I assume we are still in. I was then taken by some stormbreaker owls, and now I'm here awaiting a rescue mission." The woman eyed Shawn for a moment and her expression told him everything on her mind. She was lost and amazed and curious at the brief story. The Leo Mandarin paintings? The ones that were converted into a doorway to an unknown world. She spoke as if to herself and moved slowly about the room, now in deep thought. She paused at the hole in the wall and peered within it. She looked at Shawn and once more began going through her mind as if a large bit of a puzzle had just fallen into place. "So, if you're from another world, does magic exist there too?" "No, it does not." Jolene had asked me that very question. In fact, I believe that was her first question to me. "Look, I hate to interrupt your thought process, but can I get your name at least?" "Sarah," the woman answered without giving it another second thought. "She asks you that because if you can wield magic, then she would have use for you. If not, then you end up like the owls." Sarah leaned up against the wall that Shawn was thrown up against minutes ago by Sarah's own magical blast. She kept her distance but seemed intrigued enough to answer his questions. "Sarah, nice name, it suits you." Shawn stood up and rubbed his shoulder that seemed to have taken the brunt of his body weight when he collided with the wall. "Well, I know I won't pass her test. Do you think we can help one another out? You spoke of a rescue mission. Who is it that is supposed to come for you?" Sarah asked. The Wood Elves and my friend Charles were going to hatch a plan to break me out of here unnoticed, but who knows how long that could take. Look, there is a way other than that door to get out of this room. The hole in the wall could lead out. It could, or maybe it leads to a room with all the dead bodies of the children that she has taken. There could be no way out. Sarah looked at the hole with a hint of sorrow and she reached for her forearm and rubbed it. She seemed to be eyeing it as if it was hurting, like a pain that was slowly building. Shawn walked over to the hole and peered inside and could make out nothing through the darkness. He looked back at Sarah. "You are more than welcome to join me if you'd like." Shawn waited only a moment for any kind of response and then turned into the darkness alone. Shawn felt the wall on his left and used it as a guide, but that soon took a sharp turn to the left. There was now a smell that reached him and it reminded him of a skunk, but so much worse. He had no choice but to follow the wall, yet an uneasy feeling overtook him. Then his foot slid into something solid but narrow. He felt around it with his foot and judged it to be a leg of a chair or a table. A faint light suddenly illuminated the area, and Shawn turned to see Sarah standing at the entrance of the room and a small candle hovered by her right shoulder. She looked around and was clearly in a horror-struck state. Shawn then turned his head to examine the dimly lit room and found that it was massive. There were countless beds and all had a small child lying on them. Shawn looked down and in fact his foot had struck one of the beds, and there was a little girl laying on her back with her empty eye sockets staring back at him. "Come here," Sarah whispered and she held up a hand for him to grab. Shawn took it and together they stared into the void of children that were no doubt under Jolene's control. In front of them seemed to be a path that led further along. "We need to be very quiet," Sarah leaned close to Shawn and said slowly and barely whispered. "Stay close and we will see where this goes." Shawn managed a head nod in response to her and they both began their walk. There was another smell that caught Shawn's attention and it was that of dirt. He looked down and though the ground was smooth, it was clearly dirt and not at all stone or wood. This must have been an addition that Jolene had made herself, but why need the children and why remove their eyes and better yet, are they even alive? He thought. The room was silent as a grave and no doubt in Shawn's mind that is where they were now walking through. Curious enough to further uphold this theory, the children were not breathing at all. The only breathing that could be heard was from Sarah and Shawn himself. After some time, they came across a wall ahead of them and a hole, a little smaller than the first one they had entered in, was now their only option for moving on. Shawn looked over to Sarah and she was already looking at him and she seemed worried. There was a feeling even in Shawn's stomach that this was no exit, but a trick that Jolene had set up for them to give them false hope. Sarah led the way through the hole, Shawn was close. The ground beneath them had changed drastically, the ground wasn't smooth anymore and it felt soft. Shawn looked down and could see leaves, damp and not at all brittle, which muffled their footsteps. Also, the ground itself began to rise. Slowly it circled around and soon there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Sarah got right up to the entrance and peered out. "It seems quiet enough, but there could be an ambush waiting for us here. We don't have much of a choice." "I'm not going back there, I'll take my chances anywhere else." Shawn gave Sarah a smile and she seemed to agree with his words. She stepped out and Shawn followed closely and was relieved to see a crowded part in the forest. It was hard to make out anything that was more than 20 yards out due to the same green fog that lingered around Jolene's home. The air smelt so good, it was like a breath of freedom and relief. Shawn turned around to see the tunnel in which they climbed out of and was a bit surprised. There was a thick tree and a large hole in the base of it where they had climbed out of. "Glad you both made it out," said a woman's voice, yet the sound seemed like it came from all around them as if the trees had all said it in unison. "Damn," said Sarah under her breath. "I knew that was too easy. Show yourself, witch." Shawn had for a moment thought that Sarah might have been wrong in assuming that the voice was from Jolene. Unfortunately, he got confirmation a moment later when Jolene herself slipped out from behind a nearby tree. She was not alone, her wolf, Dremmer, accompanied her and he wore a very satisfying expression. "So, am I to believe that my accommodations were not up to your liking? Pity, but then again people often misunderstand my hospitality for slavery. I mean, I can't imagine why." Jolene's tone was not kind and yet she seemed to be enjoying teasing them. "I propose a magic duel," said Sarah with her patience nearing its end. "You and me. The victor chooses what the other's fate will be. Do you accept? A magic duel. Sounds very exciting. I don't think I have had the pleasure of such an activity in recent years." Jolene eyed Shawn, and that cold feeling came back and shook him from the inside out. "Very well, I accept," Jolene bowed, and then a large black staff materialized in her left hand. It looked more like a scorched branch, but at the top was a massive ruby gemstone and it gleamed in the unnatural green light. Shawn looked at Sarah, and she too had summoned a staff from thin air, and this one was a dark brown-colored staff that was very straight, and appeared to be polished. At the top was a golden ring that arched around an amber stone. With her right hand, she pulled a large book, and again, seeming from nowhere, and she pushed it away from her just in arm's reach, and there it floated. "I believe introductions are in order," said Sarah, and she smiled and relaxed her posture a bit. "My name is Sarah Severlin, and I have been charged to bring you to justice for your countless crimes against the Western Kingdoms." "Oh, a Severlin is it? One who forsakes all family ties to be a product of the mages of the world. I hear training in Severlin is very rigorous. I assume that staff is one of many, perhaps wielding a fair bit of power, but not an effective amount." Jolene was still toying with them. "I suppose you would like an introduction of my own. I am Jolene Hamlin, and I have not lived such a tattered life and climbed the ladder of power to be stopped by you, Sarah Severlin, a mage still in her training diapers. You are in my part of the forest, and this fog aids in my great wealth of magical power." Sarah held her emotions in check and still seemed eager to take on the Witch of the Brunel Forest. Jolene gave a smirk, and suddenly, a black ball of energy began to grow on the top of her staff. It shot sparks of energy all around her, and a swirling wind filled the air. Sarah raised her left hand, and Shawn could see a transparent shield form up around her. Suddenly Jolene vanished, and for a split second, the air was calm. Then from behind Sarah, Jolene reappeared and fired the black ball of energy at Sarah. The ball exploded when it struck the shield surrounding Sarah, and when it did, the shield broke, but Sarah was unharmed, and she chucked a white ball of energy of her own towards Jolene's face. Jolene waved her hand in front of her, and the ball followed the movement and struck a tree hard and blew it down. Surely if that was to have hit its mark, Jolene would have been done for, or at least badly injured. The battle raged on, but Shawn sensed that something was watching him. He spun around, and sure enough, Dremor was now racing towards him with his eyes glowing green and his fangs out, threatening to tear into him. There was hardly any time to react. Dremor was now in mid-leap and heading for Shawn's chest. There was a thought that flashed before his mind, and he held up his hands in hopes that it would work. The next moment a blast of air shot towards Dremor that sent him flying backwards and landed in a nearby bush. Shawn looked at his hands, then to Sarah and Jolene to see if one of them had helped to send the wolf backwards, but they were still stuck in combat with one another. Shawn looked back at Dremor, who had risen back up and was once more charging at Shawn. This time Shawn created a spell in his mind. He knew that he was the one to deflect Dremor a moment before, so to confirm that it was him, he had to try something different. He looked at the trees and held his arms out, and then clenched his fist and pulled them down to his sides. As he did, a few of the tree branches that Dremor was running by had reached out and grabbed the wolf, and he tripped over the thick branches and fell hard on his face. Shawn then raised his hands, and then roots of the trees and bushes nearby came to the surface and wrapped themselves around Dremor. Shawn heard a loud clash of spells colliding into one another from behind him, which made the whole forest tremble. He looked to see how Sarah was faring, but was disappointed when he realized she seemed very winded, drained of most of her energy while casting her spells. Jolene, on the other hand, seemed like she was still warming up. Shawn thought that he could help Sarah, and there was another spell in mind in which he needed to try if he was to escape Jolene's captivity. Jolene's attention was still on Sarah, and Shawn then steadied his hands and thought of fire. He moved his hands close to one another and acted as if there was a ball in between them. He tried to make a fireball but failed. Shawn tried again and again, but still the same results. How strange that I could easily manipulate the forest, but creating something from thin air. That's it, I need to use the forest. He thought out loud. Just then Sarah was struck down, and she was gasping for breath. She was lying on the ground, her staff and book laid out around her, but she did not try to get up. Jolene was now moving towards her and spinning her staff around in a very victorious sort of way. "Oh, my dear Lady Severlin. Good effort and all that, but not even close." Jolene shook her head and knelt beside Sarah and touched her back as if she was caring for her. "It wasn't bad as far as fights go, but might I give you just a little tip?" "I hate you," Sarah coughed, and Shawn could see that she spit up blood when she spoke. "Oh, I bet, to be beaten so easily." Well, I would hate me too. Jolene stood up and walked over to Sarah's staff and tossed it into the air. As it spun around, Jolene held up her staff and the emerald gem at the top of it began to glow. As it did, Shawn noticed that it was consuming the other staff that was twirling in the air. It looked like it was dissolving into smoke before his eyes, and just before it struck the ground, the entire staff had been swallowed by the gem. Once out of sight, the gem on Jolene's staff had stopped glowing. I'm sure that in your hands, those little Severland staffs seem powerful enough, but we know that it's no match for mine. If it looks familiar, then I'd be surprised and would think of you as a world traveler. Jolene now moved over to Sarah's other side and reached for the book. All the while, Shawn had thought of a spell and hoped that it would work. He raised his left hand in the air and pulled his arm over in front of his face. The branches of a tree near Jolene moved slowly and the tips curled up into a hand and hovered over Jolene's head. Then Shawn made a gesture of reaching down and closing his hand, and as he did, the arm of the tree scooped up the book right out of Jolene's hands. She spun around and took the book back with remarkable speed, and then she whirled around and eyed Shawn. Then she caught a glimpse of Dremmer lying face down on the ground and was still being pinned down by an assortment of roots. Jolene then gave a smile and she tossed the book over her shoulder and made her way to Shawn. I knew it. I knew it, she repeated with pure excitement. You are the one I have been waiting for. A master of magic from beyond the portrait, she laughed and then moved over to Dremmer and waved her hands over the roots and they quickly subsided back into the ground. You did speak of this, my queen, said Dremmer as he shook out his fur. Dremmer walked up to Shawn and just like Jolene, seemed very pleased with him and what he had done. I just attacked you guys, shouldn't you be mad or trying to kill me? Shawn was beyond confused and he had yet to let his spell casting abilities settle in. How did I do that? There is much to discuss, my new apprentice, said Jolene, and she actually hugged Shawn like he was a long-lost friend. We can start now, Shawn, your destiny, your training. Training? Destiny? Shawn raised an eyebrow and looked from Jolene to Dremmer in bewilderment.